Greetings, everyone. This is the alternative guy back here with another video. I am really excited being back on again. Been a while since we made a video, and this video is going to be really one of the most important videos that I've ever done. It's about Fort Christanna. It's a fort that was built in like the south side of Virginia, well, the southeastern side of Virginia, in Brunswick County, Lawrenceville, Virginia. This is so important because the fort had a major impact on the entire East Coast, all up and down the East Coast. All up and down the East Coast, Native American tribes had dealings with this fort. And the fort was established by the then Governor Alexander Spotswood. And at that time, Virginia was a colony of the British Empire. And there was a lot of things going on. A lot of things took place at this fort. What really interests me with doing this video about the fort was I grew up in that area. And I went to elementary school, and I went to high school, and I grew up in this area, and I never heard anything about this fort until last year, 2020. I was having a conversation with one of my cousins, and I was trying to get some pictures from her of some of my grandparents. And we were talking, and I was telling her that I was doing research on our family because I had discovered that our family had Native American ancestry in it. So she told me, said, well, there's a fort, Fort Christanna, that's not far from here. And it was an Indian trading post. And that really got my attention. So I said, oh yeah. So she told me where it was located, and I went by. I'm going to show you some videos later on. I'll show you a video of the fort. And it really got my attention. And so what I'm going to do, this video is probably going to be in different parts. I'm going to show you footage about the fort. I'm going to show you a book. This book right here is written by this guy, John Kinslow. And he deals with a lot of details about the fort. And I don't know whether I mentioned it or not, but the fort was built in 1713, 1714. And it had a major impact on the Native American tribes in that area. It was established by Alexander Spotswood, and it was basically funded by the British government through this company called the Virginia Indian Company. And later on, I'm going to give you my opinion about the fort. I think it was one of the biggest cover-ups in Virginia's history. I'll tell you the reason why I think it was a cover-up. And for all of the people that grew up in that area, lived in anywhere on the East Coast, this whole fort, even though it was only open from 1714 to 1717, but it still had an impact on all of that community, especially Brunswick County, Greenville County, Mecklenburg County, Southampton County, all the way into North Carolina. It was built in Brunswick County, Lawrenceville, Virginia. And the reason why it had such an impact was because you have people living there now, and most people have no clue about how we got there. I went to school in Brunswick County. I grew up about maybe 7 to 8 miles from the fort. The school that I went to, one of the elementary schools that I went to was, well, matter of fact, both of the schools that I went to were about 6 miles from the fort now, as it stands today. The school that I went to is about 6 miles. One of them is called Meherrin Elementary School. And the other one is called Totara Elementary School. And then the high school that I went to at first was called James Solomon Russell. And then when integration took place, it became Brunswick Senior High School. The first school that I went to was called Meherrin Powhatan. Meherrin is a tribe of Native Americans. Some of them still exist today, called the Meherrin Indians, but the Meherrin tribe. And then there was a tribe, Powhatan tribe in Virginia. And then there was a tribe called Totara. And these tribes were right in the area, lived in that area during that time in the 1700s. So this is what we're going to explore. We're going to show you the connection, and we're going to show you that most people in that area think that we all came through the transatlantic slave trade, and that's not the case. I'm going to show you some videos. I'm going to share books with you, and we're going to show you that, and I'm going to show you my personal connection to this area. So stick with me. It's a serious subject, and we're gonna go through it. But I think it was one of the best kept secrets on the whole East Coast, because it's an amazing story. It's an amazing story, and it's amazing. It's an amazing cover up, and we're gonna show you, and we're gonna share with you, because with this book, even though Mr. Kinslow, he did a great job. He dealt with a lot of the details centered around the fort. He did the best job that I've seen so far, as somebody dealing with the activities and the details about what really went on. And this book is definitely a book that you might want to read, but I'm going to show you. Now, one of the reasons, the problem that I have with him is that on this book, he has this guy on the book, supposed to be an Indian on the book. And to me, well, I know where he got this picture from, this idea of this picture from, but this guy looks more like a Caucasian to me. And this is another thing that we're gonna show you also. I'm gonna show you some pictures of some of the tribe members today, and then that way you'll be able to see that he could have easily gotten a picture of some of the natives that were ancestors to the tribes, because they were the name of the tribes. There were several tribes. As a matter of fact, he said there was about 23 different tribes that was affiliated with the fort. But Governor Spotswood, he decides to name all of them the Saponi tribe. But the people, descendants of these tribes still live today. So he could have easily gotten a picture of somebody that were descendants of these tribes, but he chose to use this guy. So I have a problem with that. And we're going to show you more details. Okay, I'm going to show you some pictures of some Saponi natives now. Okay, so now we have, these are some different tribes that was under the name of the Saponi. And I'm just going to show you some of the photos. And these are descendants of the Saponi Indians. The Saponis were in that area, all around Brunswick County, all up and down the East Coast, but they had dealings with this fort. And so the governor at that time, Governor Alexander Spotswood, he just gave all of them the name Saponi. So you can see that the gentleman that wrote the book, he could have easily gotten some of these pictures, or, you know, they would have looked more like the natives did at that time. And we're going to go more into detail about other information about how the natives looked during the time of when the first explorers came here. So I just wanted to show you some pictures of some of the indigenous people during that time. And it was many many tribes that the governor dealt with, the Occaneechees, the Tutero, the Catawba. So yeah, he could have gotten some other pictures better than that one that looked more like the Caucasian guy. But there's a reason for all of that, and we'll deal with that later on. But I just wanted to share with you some pictures. And any of these people, if you look at them, any of them could be, okay, let's take this one here. Any of them could be considered African American today. And like I said, I grew up in that area. I knew people that grew up in that area. And that's why I think it was a cover-up. And I'm going to show you pictures of my ancestors also. Okay, so we'll get back. Now this, now I'm going to show you some books that, because I don't want you to think that I'm just coming up with this stuff off the top of my head. So I'm going to share with you some books that I read centered around the Native Americans in this country and how I came to the conclusions that I came to. Okay. This first book is called Black People Are Indigenous to the Americas, Research Material for the Inquisitive by Kimberly Norton. In this book, on page 6, she described what the early explorers, she described how the native, she said the early explorers, I'm going to read what she said the early explorers said they looked like. Black Swat, blacker than other tribes, brown yellow, brown red, browner color, brunette, chestnut color, cinnamon color, copper cast, copper colored skin, copper complexion, coppery complexion, dark bronze color, dark brown hue, dark color, dark complexion, dark copper colored, dark of complexion, dark skinned, darker than copper, deep brunette, deep chestnut, dingy brown, dirty copper colored, dirty dark red, dull brown, hazel complexion, light copper color, lighter copper color, orange, tawny, pale yellow, reddish brown, swarthy, tawny red. So you can see that these are the descriptions of the early explorers, who they saw, and this was all up and down, all on the different coasts, the west coast, all up and down the east coast, when they when they landed, these are the people that they saw. Okay, so now we're going to go to the next book, and the next book is called The Only Land They Knew, and this book was written by Lynch Wright Jr., and I have two books by him. The Only Land They Knew, and inside his book he has a description also of what the early explorers, who they saw. Southern Indians looked and dressed quite differently from the whites, and much is known about this thanks to Lee Marnie's and White's drawings and contemporary written accounts. Although posterity has referred to the natives as red men, in fact, as the earliest Europeans noted, pigmentations might be brown, tawny, olive, yellow, or copper. So you can see that it's not just coming from one writer's point of view. This is another gentleman, and he has another book also called Creeks and Seminoles, and this book is also by Lynch Wright Jr. Okay, we have another book. We have another book called Black Slaves, Indian Masters. And here's something that we have to understand too, is that after the Europeans started enslaving the natives, and then some of the natives got involved in this too. So you had some darker Indians or just Indians being enslaved by other Indians, and that went on for a while. So this book right here goes into some details about that. Okay, so here's another book called, and this book is by Patrick Mingus, and this book is called Black Indian Slave Narratives. Okay, then we have another book here. This book is called Africans and Native Americans, The Language of Race and the Evolution of Red Black People. And this book is by Jack Forbes. Forbes was a professor. He's a professor, and he's also a Native American. Well, I would say the late Jack Forbes, but he was actually a Native American, and he has several books, and he has some videos on YouTube. So you might want to check him out, because you get the perspective of another Native American. Also, you have a book by William Katz, and this book is called Black Indians, and this is a very good book. This is one of the first books that I read on this subject. Next we have a book that you can get this book from the library. You can get most of these books from the library, but I like to have personal copies to myself. This book is called Native Americans State by State, and if even with this book, it kind of gives you a sense of how Native Americans look and how they looked in different states. And the last book I want to share with you is by Bartholomew de las Casas. Bartolome de las Casas was a Spanish writer, and he was kind of like the first European to start speaking out against how the Spanish, especially the Spanish, how they were treating natives. And because the Spanish was probably the most brutal of all of them. All of them were brutal, but the Spanish was really brutal. So he talks about that in his book. And he has an interesting history because some of the things, like he was against the brutality of the Native Americans slavery, but they say he really didn't speak out against Africans being enslaved. So that was kind of like I think that was something that they claimed that he regretted, in his later years. But those are the books that I wanted to share with you, and there's plenty of videos, and there's just plenty of research material out here if you want to really get into the subject. Now we're going to show you some videos, and this brother is going to go into some details about how the whole scenario of the Native Americans came about, and this is some past history. And then the video after this brother, we're going to do one with Professor Jack Forbes, and he's going to cover another aspect of this whole Native American, the whole Native American saga. All right, so stand by.
Previously, I mentioned that the Olmecs and the Chinese combined to produce the Red Indian, and I will delve deeper into that right now. In the 4th century, a Chinese missionary under the Shang dynasty named Ho Xian, or Hu Xian, came to America in search of his people, who were the East Yi, meaning the black Chinese. When the Chinese arrived, they encountered the Olmecs, who had already been living on the land. The Chinese considered the black Olmecs as the descendants of the black Chinese, Yi people. Hu Xian's people settled and mixed in with the Olmecs and produced the Aboriginal. The Olmecs gave the lower kingdom to the Aborigines. The Aborigines called the land Mujian, which is a combination of the Olmecan Ashuric Aramaic word Mu, which means one, and the Chinese word Zhan, named after Hu Shan. Did you know that there was a province in China today called Zhan, and that this is the site of one of the only Chinese pyramids? Muzhan became Mizhan and eventually became Mekzhan, or Mexico. The Aborigines called themselves Mexicans, and they remixed with the Olmecs, which resulted in a sub-tribe called the Hopi. The Hopi clan was taught the religion of the Dogon and given the secret of the stars. Several hundred years later, the Hindu East Indians arrived in Mexico, and they bred with the Mexicans and produced Mongoloid tribe types like the Inuit and Eskimo, who migrated far north into Canada and Alaska. Out of the Mexican also came the Aztec, Inca, Toltec, Mixtec, and the Mayans, which were the 5 barbarian nations. The Mayans rejected their Olmec ancestry and gravitated towards their Chinese ancestry. The Mayans began practicing human sacrifices and cannibalism. The Mayans were banished by the original Olmecs and were told to leave or be destroyed. The Mayan relocated and sailed east to Asia and mixed in with the Mongols of Southeast Asia and became known as Angkor. Today, the Angkors no longer go by that ancient name. Their modern day name is Cambodian. Yes, the Cambodians are really the Native Americans that were banished. This is why the ruins in ancient Cambodia are identical to the ruins of the Mayan Empire. History claims that the Mayan civilization just vanished. The word Mayan means illusions because it seems as if they disappeared overnight. The Mayans didn't just disappear. An entire ethnic group just simply vanished overnight. They simply packed up and moved to the other side of the planet. And you might be wondering, am I saying that the Red Indian is an aborigine? Well, the Red Indian is a result of mixing between Olmecs and Chinese. This is why you have some Native Americans with dark skin and Negroid features, and some with light skin and Mongoloid features. Olmecs were indigenous Americans. Chinese were immigrants. Mexicans are aborigines who were the combination of Olmecs and Chinese. The East Indians that came here were also immigrants. As for the tribes of North America, the tribes of North America were a result of Olmec and Mexicans. However, some of the Mexicans continued to mix with the Chinese and produced yellow tribes like Pueblo and Manso. The yellow tribes mixed in with each other and produced tribes like the Chinook, Tutuni, Kalupaya, Chumash, Oinut, and others. Tribes broke off from each other and produced even more tribes that settled in California. The darker skinned tribes were the tribes that managed to contain much of the Olmec blood, like the Arapaho, Arikara, the Blackfoot, Cheyenne, Crow, Apache, Mandan, the Pawnee, and the Shoshone. In the 15th century, all of this changed. The Europeans arrived for the first time, the Spaniards, French, British, Italians, and Portuguese. The Europeans mixed in with all of the tribes, black, red, and yellow, and they produced even more stocks. Today you will find white Native American tribes. The tribes that did not wish to mix with the Europeans were destroyed. The Incans were destroyed by the Spanish, who stole their culture and are now calling themselves Hispanic, which is a term that was popularized and some say even coined by Ronald Reagan. As far as the darker tribes or the black tribes, the Olmecs migrated into two directions. One group of the Olmecs migrated into the eastern islands near the Bermuda Triangle and settled in the islands of Jamaica, Haiti, the Bahamas, Trinidad, and Barbados. The Olmecs set up colonies on these islands and became known as the Arawak. These were the people Christopher Columbus encountered. The Spanish and the British mixed in with the Arawaks. The Olmecs of Haiti went back to their African roots and began practicing their religion called Yoruba, which is mistakenly called Voodoo. The Arawaks mixed in with the Portuguese and produced a tribe of half Negroid, half Latin called Taino. The Taino were invaded by another tribe called the Caribs, who were sadistic cannibalists. The Caribs migrated to an island known as the Caribbean. The other group of Olmecs traveled north and settled in Southeast America and became known as the Washoe, which means raccoon people. These people settled into areas of Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Georgia. The Washoe mixed with the Malian Moors of Africa who also came over. The result of this mixing was a tribe of pure-blooded black Native Americans called Yamasi or Yamasi. The Yamasi resided in Georgia and were the mother tribe of all dark southeastern and eastern tribes. Yamasi is a direct descendant of the Olmecs through the Washita Moors. The Washita is a derivative of the term Wichita, who are known as Kitkitish, which means raccoon eyes, which refer to the black Native Americans because of their faces. Thus the term coons was used to identify a black person. The Yamasi lived in Georgia on the Ocmulgee River near Macon, Georgia, and where the early Yamasi mounds were discovered. Today, Macon is also the home of the Harriet Tubman African American Museum. The Yamasi is the mother tribe of the Creeks, the Seminoles, the Apaches, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Catawbas, and the Cherokee. In the 1700s, the British, French, and Spaniards mixed into these tribes. In 1715, the Yamasi rose in rebellion against the English and allied with the Spaniards. Some of the Yamasi Creeks migrated to what is known as Savannah, Georgia, and became outlaws under the tribal name Yamacraw. The British began taking women and children into slavery. The native black American men mixed in with runaway African slaves. A war broke out between the Yamasi and the British in 1715, the Yamasi Uprising. Throughout the 1700s, many tribes were slaughtered. The remnants of these tribes band together to create an alliance. The newly formed tribes of Yamasi, Kusa, Kawin, Kangari were known as the Catawbas. The Catawbas spoke a dialect of ancient Kushite language, which was bits and pieces of the original Olmec African language. The Catawbas lived in South Carolina and were enemies of the Shawnee and the Iroquois, who were tribes that had mixed with the French and became almost full-blooded European. Some of the Catawbas joined the Alabama Creeks and mixed in with the Spaniards, losing much of their African traits. After the Yamasi Uprising, Native American power collapsed in Georgia and Alabama. Many of the Yamasi escaped to Florida, where they joined runaway African slaves to form what later would be called runaways, or Seminoles. Other tribes which came from this union were the Oconee and the Hitachi. The Oconee relocated from the Oconee River and moved westward to the Chattahoochee, where they mixed with the lower Creeks, which resided in the areas of Pensacola and Tallahassee, Florida. All of these tribes were originally black tribes of the Yamasi. And as far as the Yamasi mixing with the African slaves, the Yamasi and African runaways had a few things in common. They were both of the same ethnic background, they were able to blend in with each other, and they both had hatred for the British. Throughout slavery, thousands of African slaves escaped the plantations and sought refuge with the neighboring Native American tribes. The natives had an incredible knowledge of outdoor survival and location. It is often believed that Harriet Tubman herself, who freed slaves via the Underground Railroad, was herself a black Native American because of her knowledge of the paths and the terrain. Many African slaves and Native Americans mixed. Even the red tribes took in African slaves. Some tribes even owned slaves. However, unlike the Europeans, Africans were mostly considered indentured servants and treated as human beings by their Native American owners. Today there are red Seminoles and black Seminoles, red Creeks and black Creeks, red Cherokee and black Cherokee. The Seminoles, they did oppose slavery. The U.S. Army prosecuted the Seminoles because they opposed slavery. The Seminoles realized that the people who were being sold into slavery were a faction of them, distant cousins, relatives in a way. The black Seminoles was the only tribe at the time that opposed slavery. U.S. slaveholders tried to cause tension between red Seminoles and black Seminoles. Thus, a war erupted between the Seminoles and the U.S. slaveholders. Seminoles and African slaves joined together and attacked slave plantations. General Andrew Jackson prepared to wipe out the Seminoles. Jackson gathered Creek tribes along the U.S. soldiers to destroy the Seminoles. This war lasted for decades and extended all throughout Florida. By 1826, wealthy Creeks who had also owned slaves were sent to persuade the Seminoles to join in on the slave trade. When the Seminoles once again refused, Seminoles were kidnapped and sold on the southern slave markets. The U.S. Army was also trying to push the red Seminoles out of Florida onto reserved Indian territory west of the Mississippi. The Army was faced with much opposition with the resistance of the Seminoles, who were guided by the red Seminole chief Osakala. The red Seminoles knew that the whites would not follow after them for their fear of alligators and snakes. The black Seminoles remained in Texas and moved into Oklahoma, Idaho, and mixed in with the Blackfeet, Comanche, the Kiowa, Apache, the Mandan, the Omaha, Osage, Pawnee, and Arikara, and their closest relatives, the Wichita. People wonder if the actual Blackfoot Indians got their name because they were black Americans. And that's not necessarily so. The Blackfoot Indians got their name because they would stain their moccasins with burnt ashes. The Blackfoot tribe was at one time Saskatchewan Native Americans who relocated to the Montana in search for buffalo. The Blackfoot or Blackfeet consists of 3 divisions: the Siksika, the Kainai, and the Piegan. The entire group is known as Bloods and are descendants of the Wichita Yamasi Moors. If you look closely at many Native American tribes, you can still see their African traits. You may wonder, are there any black tribes left? There is a woman named Rediscovering Washita Turner Gaston L. Bay, and she's the legal heir by blood to the Mason Rouge land grants that were willed to her by her great-great-grandfather Henry Turner. Veridachi's land is the District of Louisiana, which is named after her great-great-great-grandfather's friend, Louis Bourgogne, who sold the land to Joseph de Maison Rouge in 1795. Joseph had a daughter named Anne, in which the land went to her. Annie named the land Louisiana after Louis and Annie. In 1848, the U.S. government took the Turners to court to take the District of Louisiana. However, the government lost, and the land was granted to the heirs of Henry Turner, Veridachi Washita Turner Gaston L. Bay. Veridachi has set up a sovereign nation of Washita Moors that is recognized by the United States government. The Subcommission on Prevention of Discrimination and Protection of Minority Workers Groups on Indigenous Populations recognized the Wichita as the oldest indigenous people on the earth. The U.S. government does not own the District of Louisiana, as we may believe. Also, the state of Georgia is owned by a Yamasi. It is documented. Many Native Americans signed treaties with the U.S. government but never actually sold any of their land over. Technically, the land still belongs to the so-called Indians, not the federal government. So you may be wondering if I'm trying to say that out of the 550 some odd Native American tribes, they're all descendants of black people. I'm saying that all so-called American Indians descended from the Mexican Olmecs and the various African and Asian mixtures throughout. How does this make other Native Americans feel, especially today's Red Indian? It is important that we as Americans understand the origin of the so-called American Indian, and it is important that we accept the truth. Black Indians are no more native than the so-called red man in culture. The culture and religion that is practiced by today's Native Americans is the natural, non-theological concept of the Malian Moors of Africa, the Olmecs, and the Aztecs of Mexico, as well as the early concept of the mound builders. There are various tribes today that will admit to their African ancestry. The Hopis, Apache, Aztec, Zuni, Nez Perce, Miami, Blackfoot, Catawba, and Seminole all possess knowledge of African ancestry. What's more important is not the feeling concerning indigenous people, but more so the truthful data and the validity and acceptance of that data. You may be asking, why do Red Native Americans believe that they are the first? Well, many Red Native Americans are well aware of the information that I've just presented to you, and some are not aware. Tribes like the Hopi, Aztec, Apache, Pueblo, Seminole, Creek, Tuscaros, and Susquehanna have documents in their possession that tells the stories of the black gods who gave them birth. In fact, the Hopi Book of the Stars that was given to them by the Dogons tells that when the forefathers, Africans, reclaim their throne, the black and red tribes will join together and overcome their oppressors. There is a similar parable in most Native American cultures that speaks of the white eagle who has captured the red eagle until the black eagle freed the red eagle. The white eagle retreated into the cave from which he came. Look up this story. It's an actual Native American culture. It is just as important for Native Americans to understand true history as it is for Black Americans to understand true history. Blacks have been convinced that they are all ex-African slaves. Of course, this is a lie. There had been blacks in this country for thousands of years before the first Europeans. There are millions of blacks in America today who, if they trace their family heritage back, will not find any African slavery in their family. Many blacks are children of the Yamasi, Seminole, Creek, Cherokee, Blackfoot, Shoshone, etc. However, the U.S. government, in order to protect their best interests, has kept most of this information and true history from us. The U.S. government has convinced us to classify ourselves as a title that the European political system created in order to place us in a certain social bracket, African American. As an African American, we have no inalienable or indigenous rights under the Constitution. Even worse, as an African American Christian, we dig an even deeper hole for ourselves. As Black Christians, we have to admit two things. We are former slaves by calling ourselves African, and we are former slaves who converted to the slave owner's religion. Thus, we sever any connection to sovereignty or self-identity. As African American Christians, we literally become dependent on the government and relinquish all indigenous and self-governing classifications. Thus, we throw ourselves on the mercy of the U.S. judicial system. Native Americans have what is called autonomy or self-government, similar to diplomatic immunity. As indigenous people, we have the right to set up our own sovereign nations. We govern our own judicial, legislative, and penal system. As African Americans, we waive the right of self-governing and indigenous rights by admitting that we are immigrants, came over from somewhere else, and not indigenous.
Well, I think the main point is to fill in a gap that has developed because of the suppression of knowledge of the interaction of Black people and Native American people. In other words, it's to tell the story to the fullest extent possible of the interrelations between these two ethnic groups with both extremely rich heritages of culture and history.
Where were the Native American population during the time that you studied?
Well, during that time period, I think virtually all areas of the Americas and all of the islands, virtually, including up to Greenland, for the most part, were occupied by different native people. So the entire continent and virtually all of the islands were occupied. The Spanish writer Bartolomé de las Casas, who is the principal author of that gives us the information from Columbus's diaries. Columbus chose to finance the conquest of the West Indies by selling Native American slaves, and he characterized it as his granjeria, or granary. In other words, it was the granary that was going to pay for the conquest, that is, Native American bodies. And Columbus himself sent at least 3,000 and possibly as many as 6,000 or more Native American slaves to Europe. This begins as early as 1493. On his return voyage, he takes about 24 Native Americans to Portugal and Spain. In the subsequent voyages, many, many more are sent, men and women. Now, he intends to sell them by the thousands, not only in Spain, but he mentions the Azores, the Canary Islands, the Cape Verde Islands off, the west coast of Africa. The Cape Verde Islands off, the west coast of Africa. The Cape Verde Islands off, the west coast of Africa. As well as in Portugal and Spain and elsewhere. So even before there are any appreciable number of African slaves being sent to the Americas, there are Native American slaves being sent to Europe. principally probably ending up in Lisbon and Seville or Sevilla in southern Spain. So even before there are any appreciable number of African slaves being sent to the Americas, there are Native American slaves being sent to Europe, principally probably ending up in Lisbon and Seville or Sevilla in southern Spain. So even before there are any appreciable number of African slaves being sent to the Americas, there are Native American slaves being sent to Europe, principally probably ending up in Lisbon and Seville or Sevilla in southern Spain.
Now, when people think of American slavery, they don't think of the enslavement of Native Americans. Why is this?
Well, partly because the enslavement of Native Americans occurred first. The enslavement of Native Americans occurred first. The enslavement of Native Americans occurred first.
Say that again, please. Say that again.
The enslavement of Native Americans really began before the enslavement of Africans. Not only in the Caribbean by the Spanish, where it was extremely extensive. And in the Caribbean, I might mention that the numbers were huge that were involved, and they had several kinds of slaves. They had the normal slave, but they also had people who were called, they were called Indians from the useless islands. They were from islands where there was no gold. And so they had the right to go and remove people from those islands.
Useless islands?
Yeah, well, Jamaica, for example, would be a useless island because it had no gold. Inutiles, not useful. And they needed labor so badly on Haiti, where the gold was found, Haiti, and Cuba, that they were stealing people constantly and removing them by force from other islands, even after it was no longer technically in the best or possible, legally even, to enslave. They still could remove them as forced free labor, we could call it later coolie labor, right? Mm-hmm. And then they had other categories of unfree Indians as well. But once the population declined on the islands themselves, they began raiding the north coast of Venezuela and Colombia very extensively, also part of Panama. They also came up here and cleaned out the Bahamas completely. All the Lucayo people.
What period are we talking about now?
Well, we're into the 1440s, 1540s, 1560s. Many people from Florida, South Carolina is raided for slaves. And also the west coast of Mexico in the 1530s. Many Mexican Indians are sold as slaves, and it extends on into a much later period of time. But in short, the tremendous numbers of Native Americans were enslaved, and the Spaniards kept looking farther and farther afield for slaves to replenish the labor supply.
Okay, all right, let's deal with something that's very, very, very strategic. And it's very, if you think about it, it's the depths of what the whole objective was all about. And the objective of the British proved to be more successful than the Spanish, because the Spanish came, the French came, And they tried to do the same thing. They tried to take over. They tried to establish themselves in the country. But neither one of them, or none of the other settlers was as successful as the British. And let's look at the reason why the British were successful. Even though the fort stayed open, they say from 1714 to 1717, even though the fort only stayed open that time, that small amount of time, but they still were successful. And by the way, this fort was affiliated with the college, was called the College of Women Mary at that time. So the British was successful, and I'm going to use a term, a tree is known by the fruit it bears. So let's look at the country now. And then we'll look at it the way it was then. The main objective that Spotswood kept putting emphasis on was Christianizing the natives and teaching them English. So why would you want to teach them English? We'll deal with that first. English has a word in it called spelling. And what is a spell? Just think about it. Certain words can put you under a spell. And that's what spelling is. Words put you under spells. So they wanted to teach them English. They wanted them to think that what they had didn't mean anything. They wanted them to feel like their culture was heathenistic and that what they were bringing was going to civilize them. So when they brought Christianity automatically put the British in a superior position because, number one, they said that Christ, was their savior. Christ was white. Christ was supposed to have been the Son of God. And then even if you Google and say, even now, if you Google and say, let me see a picture of God. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. This is to show you the depths that the Europeans go to really push this Christianity and to show you how it's designed to support them. And that's why I say that this is the weaponization of God. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. Okay, this is what I'm talking about. Now, if you look at these pictures, this is supposed to be pictures of God, images of God. So they've been pushing this for thousands of years. So what do you think? And then you can get So just imagine a young person, 5 or 6 years old, and they're curious and they want to know, what does God look like? And they Google everything else. So if they Google, what does God look like? This is what they're going to get. This is what they're going to get. Everything European. And you already know this. Everybody already know this. But most people, especially people of color, they're in denial. They think that when somebody like me talk about this, we're trying to take their Jesus or their God from them. No, that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to show you the depths of this whole thing when it comes down to how the Europeans project themselves with God, and how most people don't have a clue about how this whole thing is centered around mythology, and most people don't know what mythology is. I wanted to share that with you to let you see that this is what the whole purpose is, to try to get you or anybody that accept the religion. This is what you're going to have to deal with. This is what you're going to have to tolerate, because that's the way they present it. So now we're going to move on. I just wanted to show you that. So the objective was to get that information, get English, and to get Christianity into the natives, so that, see, once you get Christianity in any people, any person, then you got them, because everything after that, concepts, everything is centered around them. And everything that's negative in Christianity is, I'll put it this way. Nothing in Christianity supports other people other than white people or European people. Everything else is subjugated in Christianity. And I know that that's the reason why they were so adamant about getting Christianity in the natives. And no matter where they go, they want to they'll send their missionaries in first, so that they can break the people down and they can get the religion in them. And once you get the religion in, you got them, because they're going to be subservient to them from that point on. Because anytime you create something, if you are the owner of it or the designer of it, then naturally it's going to be more beneficial to the one that designed it. And I plan to do another video with a historian friend of mine. We're going to do one on how all of the religions were designed to support the conquerors that were pushing those religions. And I'm talking about all of them. So I want you to continue to watch this channel, and we're going to go into those at a later date. But that was the main objective of Governor Spotswood, to get Christianity and get everybody to speak English. And if you look at this country now, all of the natives speak English. Very few of them have held on to their native tongues. Everybody in this country speak English, and everybody is under their spell. Even in Virginia, I live in Virginia, and you still have counties called Prince George County, you have King William County, you have numerous counties that are named after Prince George. You got counties right in this area that's still named after British rulers. So they didn't lose. And that's what we have to realize, that we have to come from under the spell. We have to come from under the spell and realize what hit us. The natives didn't realize it back then. They didn't realize it. They thought that they were going to be able to do trade and you know, I trade with you, you trade with me. You have some things that I want, I have some things that you want. They thought it was going to be an exchange like that. They didn't know that the British, the Europeans had a totally different objective. They wanted it all. And you're going to find anywhere that you find conquerors, religious conquerors or no conquerors, they do not come to share. They come to take over. And if you look at everywhere colonization has taken place, you're going to see that they didn't come to share and say, okay, well, you got this, you got these goods, we got this technology, we got something that we can merge. And they never come like that. They come wanting it all. And I think that we have to realize that that's what happened to us. That's what happened to all indigenous people all over the world. They come with their religions, and the next thing you know, they got everything. So we're going to deal with it. We're going to deal with some other things. All right, so here we go. Okay, we're just about ready to take you to the fort, but before we go on, take you to the fort, there's a couple of other I want to share with you. An area that's maybe about 5 or 6 miles from the fort is dealing with tobacco. And tobacco was a crop that was very beneficial to the natives in this area. So we want to share with you a little information about tobacco and how it had the effect that tobacco had on the natives in this area. After that, we're gonna take you and show you the Meherrin River in different places, because the Meherrin River was very important to the natives also. And the Meherrin River ran right in the back of Fort Christanna. So we want to just show you a little bit about the tobacco and, you know, about the river. Then we're going to take you to the fort. I know it's been a long journey. You know, we had a lot going on before the fort, but we just want to give you a good picture of what went on in this area. And we're going to take you to the fort after that. So thanks for your patience, and we're going to continue from here. Okay, so now we're not very far from the fort, maybe about 3 or 4 miles from the fort. But we came across this trail here called Tobacco Heritage Trail. And it's quite interesting. It has some plaques out here talking about the Native Americans. I don't know whether everybody is aware that tobacco is indigenous to this state. The state it's not a European implant. You know, they didn't bring this here. The Native Americans were using tobacco before Europeans got here. They were also using it for a different purpose than what it ended up to be. You know, the cigarettes and all that with the nicotine and all that. They used tobacco for ceremonial reasons, medicinal reasons, and so we're gonna follow this trail. This trail goes all the way to Lawrenceville, and in this direction that I'm facing, Lawrenceville is the town where the fort is located, going this direction. Now headed this way, the trail goes, this is a bike trail to a walking trail or a bike trail. Heading this way, it's going to take you into La Crosse and goes to Broadnax, then La Crosse, and all up into that area. So I'm going to show you some of the things that's on the plaques here. Okay, now we have some information. Well, this is just some trail regulations here, but right beside it, here's a plaque that talks about tobacco as being a way of life. So my wife is going to read this to you guys.
Tobacco as a way of life. Tobacco has long held a sacred and prominent role among the Indian tribes in the southeast. Well before Christopher Columbus returned with tobacco seeds from the Caribbean, or Sir Walter Raleigh made smoking fashionable in Europe when he returned from Carolina with a pipe and tobacco, Indians had universally integrated tobacco into their religious, social, and cultural ways of life. Tobacco had many ceremonial uses as well. Indians used the green leaves of tobacco as a way to purify oneself before a ceremony and placed the tobacco at the base of a fire pit when it came time to create a new fire. Tobacco was also offered to the spirits for appeasement and thanks, being thrown into the waters, ground, and air for good fishing, hunting, and travels, among other things. Tobacco was commonly used as a direct medicine for ailments like snake bites or bee stings, and as a part of other roots and plants that were mixed together to form a cure. Tobacco even had a higher standing among other medicines, since it was always mixed in boiling water or a bowl first before other ingredients were added. Socially, both men and women smoked tobacco using clay pipes. Even though smoking was considered common among the Indians, the act of smoking was with a ceremonial pipe, when discussing matters of state, took on an air of ceremony when all parties present smoked from the same pipe and blessed the words spoken as truth. Indians raised a different variety of tobacco than the West Indies variety currently used worldwide. They also used the sun to cure the leaves.
Okay, so there you have it. So now the tobacco that we're getting now, that people are smoking now in the cigarette packs and all that, you can tell that all of the other garbage has been added to it. And so that's usually the way most of the Europeans, what they would do, they would take something good and turn it into something bad. So there you have it. So we're gonna head down the trail. We're gonna go down the trail. I don't know exactly how far we're gonna go because this is my first time being here. So we're gonna see what the trail have to offer. And by the way, this used to be a railroad track. So it's just been turned into a trail now. Okay. So here's another problem that I have whenever we run across these plaques like this, and when they're showing the Native Americans, they always have these crazy looking pictures of the natives, and they always have them looking like they're European. Okay, now we're getting ready to go down this trail. I'm going to ride down to the river, to the Meherrin River, the mighty Meherrin River. I hope you guys are enjoying this adventure with me. And by the way, if I keep riding, this trail will take me all the way into Lawrenceville, in the town where the fort is located. But right now, we're just going to go down to the river. Okay, we're getting ready to come up on the river here. Okay, so we made it to the river. This is the mighty Meherrin River. As you can see, this river is not a big, wide, deep river. But just imagine natives up and down this river on canoes or cutouts. That's what it was all about back then, up and down this river. It's a very well-known river, the mighty Meherrin. Very peaceful up in here too. This is another area where the Meherrin River, it runs right down beside the fort. This area here is where they said a lot of the natives lived in this area. It's supposed to have been like a 6-mile radius around the fort, and this part of the river is right down the road, and it runs from right located here. It runs right down behind the fort, and it's a very nice area here. There was plenty of land around the fort that was really nice. All of this beautiful land here was in the area where they said the natives live, and this area here is another part of Meherrin River that's maybe about 4 miles before you get to the fort. But I just wanted to show you different areas of the river, so you can imagine this was back in the early 1700s. So I'm pretty sure the river wasn't like it is now, because it was being used a lot. They used the river for transporting, and so a lot of fishing was going on. The part that it's hard for me to understand how you have people that came to this country all the way from England, and they're the ones that's allotting out where the native tribes would live. And they were born here, but you're being told where you can live and what land you could use. And you can see that this was a lot of land, but no native owned this land right now. We don't know exactly who owned it, but it definitely got away from them, and that was a part of the land theft. So now we're going to head to the fort. We're going to show you the fort. And we're headed to the fort now. Fort Christanna. So, but you can see all of the lands surrounding it. And they said the natives lived within a 6-mile radius around the fort. So we're gonna go on. We're gonna head to the fort. selling timber off of this land. And we know who's benefiting from this timber being sold. Just look at this is the area that the natives live surrounding the fort. They wanted friendly natives to live around the fort so that they could do the trading with them, and it was a protection for the settlers to do trading with the natives around this area. Okay, we're getting ready to come up on the fort. Now this fort was built in 1714, so can't expect things to look like it is now. So here we are coming up on Fort Christanna. Not very much left here, I can tell you that now. But we're going to show you what's on a lot of these plaques, and give you a little tour of what used to be the fort. Christiana. You would think, as major as of an impact that this fort had on Southside Virginia, that it would be more than this. But we're going to give you, we're going to show you what's here, and we'll go from there. Okay, this is one of the signs, and they have a picture of two hands shaking. Yeah, well, the two hands might be shaking, but the lighter hand had the upper hand, and they always had the upper hand. In all the negotiations, everything benefited the lighter hand. Okay, we're going to start right up here, and then we're going to read.
What does this say right here?
My wife is going to read this this plaque here. Basically, it's some historical information, but I want you to pay close attention to this this photo here that was taken at a ceremony in 1924. And I want you to look at the two Native Americans that's on this plaque, and you can see how the one in the middle is kind of dark, and he was a Pamunkey Indian, and the Pamunkey tribe was a part of the natives that was affiliated with the fort also. So my wife is going to read a little bit about what it says, because I don't know if you can see it that clear.
Fort Christanna Historical Site. In 1714, working through the Virginia Indian Company, Governor Alexander Spotswood initiated the construction of Fort Christanna on a bank of the Meherrin River. This fort served several important purposes. The Indian Company received a monopoly on regional fur trade there, ensuring both fair trade practices with tribes and profits for shareholders. With the corporation of tribes friendly to the English, the fort provided defense for the southern border of Virginia during a turbulent time. Situated at the center of a 36 square mile tract of land set aside for the Saponi, Occaneechi, Totero, and Stuckanucks, the fort provided protection for those tribes. The tribes built a town downhill from the fort. Governor Spotswood erected a handsome schoolhouse at the Indian town and provided a salary for the schoolmaster, Reverend Charles Griffin, who taught and lived in the town. The governor's goal was to re-educate and indoctrinate Indian children from several tribes by instructing them in Anglican religion and English. His goal also was to hold the children at the school to ensure tribal cooperation with the English. In 1717, the General Assembly withdrew its financial support. Reverend Griffin relocated to teach at the Indian school at Will and Mary. Trade and treaty making continued at the fort. But in 1729, the tribes living at Christanna moved south to live with the Catawba. The following year, the tract was parceled out to wealthy landowners. In 1924, the National Society of the Colonial Dames of America in the Commonwealth of Virginia acquired land where the fort once stood and erected a monument. Archaeological excavations discovered the perimeter of the original fort, and the Brunswick County Board of Supervisors acquired 25 additional acres for the site.
Okay, so there you have it. A brief synopsis of what really went on at this fort. Okay, now we're going to look at some other plaques around here. Okay, here's another section of the fort that we're going to go. Now over here you have a cannon, a little small cannon. But they were saying that at this fort, it had 5 different sides on it. It was like a pentagon. And it had a 1,400-pound cannon on each corner. So this little cannon here, I don't know what that's all about. But I guess they wanted to have something here. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, this is the site of the Fort Christanna and the Indian School, which were established by Governor Spotswood on the southwest frontier of Virginia.
Okay, so now we're going to go back over to this side here. And, oh, here's a plaque that's kind of interesting. This is the guy that was the mastermind behind it all. Governor Alexander Spotswood, I'm sorry. This is Governor Alexander Spotswood. We pretty much read, what his, we read his bio over the other place over there. The only thing that's different on this one is that he was born Uh,
about his outfit and how.
well, you can tell that he was British because of his outfit and his hairpiece and his hands on his hip. So we're going to talk a little bit. Okay, he Alexander Spotswood, 1676 to 1740, was governor of Virginia from 1710 to 1722. Born in Africa of Scottish family, he distinguished himself at the Battle of Blenheim and was wounded. Okay, so that's all I'm going to do on him. We gave you his bio over on the other plaque. Okay, here's another plaque, and it said Fort Christanna, established 1714, the farthest western outpost of the British Empire.
Okay, so it was under British control.
Yeah, so I guess you can say that saying that they used to have that the sun never set on the British Empire was true. Now this is a little replica of their fort right here.
The fort was pentagonal in shape, with each side 100 yards long, made of split trees wedged into the earth. At every corner was a bastion house, each with a 1,400-pound cannon. Inside were a number of buildings to house the 12 rangers, the Indian school, and trading items, animals, and storage. A well on the property provided water.
Well, you would think that if they have a description of the fort, you would think that they could replicate that now. You know, they got all that information. Okay. All right, but anyway, we're going to go over here.
The story of Native Americans after Jamestown's founding in 1607 is a tragic one. At that time, the Sioux Indians of Virginia probably numbered 6,300 people. By 1714, when Fort Christiana was established, they were in difficult circumstances, being reduced in number by diseases, oppressed by settlers from England pushing into the interior, and harassed by more aggressive tribes. Their numbers had fallen to 600 people, many of them old and sick. Much of their land had been lost. In 1713, the Saponi, Okinichi, Totero, and Stuckanok tribes signed a treaty that provided them a large tract of land for homes, hunting, and trading. This land was a safe distance from English colonists. If colonists settled too close to their land, the treaty promised the tribes land further west. Fort Christanna was built within the tract of land provided these tribes by the Treaty of 1713. With ongoing support from Governor Spotswood, the Saponi benefited from the protected location. They pursued traditional trading activities with other tribes and with the English. Gathered here, these 4 tribes all became known as Saponi. As many as 15 other tribes came to trade and to make treaties at Fort Christanna. Inside the fort, children of the Saponi and other tribes were educated in a European fashion at a school for Indians, the same way our children are being educated today in a European fashion.
Now here's another point I made before, where anytime these drawings that you have on these plaques, they always have the natives looking real crazy. And they really, I just have a problem with the way they depict the natives.
They're never actual pictures, they're drawings.
Now on the plaque on the other side over here, you in 1924, you have an actual picture. And that picture had, the reason why, because you have Europeans in that picture. But anytime you have pictures of Native Americans alone, these sketches like this, then they have them looking real crazy. So this little area over here is supposed to be a learning circle where if a teacher wanted to bring a class out or somebody wanted to come out and have a discussion about the fort, they could sit around and do that. But this is basically it, the fort. This is basically the area where the fort was at.
All those years of history.
Look at right here, ladies and gentlemen, what's left of this fort that had that major impact on all of these people. That should tell you something. History is his story.
I like that.
We've shown you the fort. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to share some information with you where I'm going to show you my connection to this area, because I grew up in this area. My family grew up in this area, and I went to school in this area. The elementary school that I went to, called Meherrin Elementary School, is about 6 miles east of here. When I got into 6th grade, we moved, and I went to another elementary school, which is another name of an Indian tribe called the Totara Indians. That elementary school is about 6 miles going north. Also, the high school that I went to is about 6 miles from here. So I have a connection to this area, and I want to let everyone know that if you lived on the East Coast, or if you lived near anywhere in Mecklenburg County, Brunswick County, Greenville County, Dinwiddie, any of those counties, then you were affiliated with this fort. Your ancestors were affiliated with this fort. The reason why I'm saying that is because the official narrative is saying that the natives live within 6 miles around this fort. But in John Kinslow's book, he mentioned that the original agreement was that the natives would live within a 23,000 acre allotted area. So that would mean that it would have to be 23,000 acres is equivalent to about 35 miles. So you were affected one way or the other if you grew up in this area. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you the paper trail of my family connection here and my connection to Native Americans that lived in this area. So continue to watch, share this video, spread the word, because I think it was a great cover-up, and we're going to show you, in my opinion, what happened. Not his story, but our story. So continue to watch, and thanks again. Peace.